I'm Amalie and I'm here with Bill, who is the candidate for Lib Dems at Hayes and Harlington. How do you feel about tonight?
Well, I didn't expect to win Hayes and Harlington because it's a strong Labour area with Tories second, so that's not a surprise. But I'm delighted with the forecasts on the national television that the Tories are losing their majority, or it's reduced. And it's fascinating that successive Conservative prime ministers and leaders have all hit the rocks on the European question. David Cameron hit the rocks and resigned, and now Theresa May's got into big trouble on Europe as well. It's very, very fascinating. It goes back to Mrs. Thatcher and every leader since then. So being a passionate pro-European, I'm really very thrilled that the Tories are making such a mess of it.
Tell me a bit more about how you felt when Brexit was actually going to happen.
Well, in the referendum campaign a year ago, I was heavily involved and out in the streets from February up till June, arguing very strongly. And what I found is that young people said, of course we must stay in Europe. It makes sense. I want to travel and be free to work anywhere I like. But it was the old people, my generation, who were saying, oh no, I don't like this, I don't like that. And so it became a struggle of who would vote. And traditionally in the UK, young people don't bother to vote. They're too busy doing other things. And the old people say, yeah, of course I always vote. So the referendum was a horrible shock. But it was only advisory. And what has really distressed and puzzled me is that there's no leadership in the House of Commons. There's a famous old saying by a politician 250 years ago called Edmund Burke, tremendously famous in British politics. He wrote to his electors in the city of Bristol saying, I am not sent by you to Parliament to just carry out your orders. I am sent to exercise my judgment, what is best for you. You sent me here to decide on your behalf, not to carry out orders. I'm not an ambassador. And what my complaint is that Mrs. May has said, well, I've got to obey the people's wish, 52%. And I'm sorry to say, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell here in Uxbridge said, oh, well, the people voted, even though it was a mistake. And they thought they had to follow that. So they're just rubber stamps rather than being leaders. And leaders would say, this is a bad mistake. Boris Johnson, Uxbridge, told terrible lies about this, and some people were persuaded by him. So the leaders should say, look, folks, we got this wrong. We're going to lead you in the right direction, which is staying in Europe. So that's why, sorry, it's a long answer. I'm delighted that the suggestion is that looks like Brexit just might not happen after all.
You think it won't happen?
Well, we've got to wait and see what the result of this election is. But Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell here, and I talked to John because I'm up against him, campaigned to stay in Europe in the referendum last year. In fact, Theresa May did too. So there's a lot of people who say we should stay. And maybe, just maybe, this result, it's certainly Theresa May is not going to be able to say, I've got a big majority, I can force through Brexit. She can't do that now. So there's hope.
And going more locally, what will you do for Hayes and Harlington if elected?
Well, I'm not going to get elected, but that's very sweet of you to ask the question. If you look at Hayes and Harlington, there's a lot of very good people. It's very disparate. The number of different nationalities I've met in the streets is completely astonishing, and they're not connected. They all live in their own little, well, I haven't met a Norwegian, I don't think, but I've met most other nationalities.
My Norwegian friend lives there, actually.
Oh, so really?
Oh,
Unfortunately, I wasn't lucky enough to meet them. But what Hayes and Harlington needs is a big new employer. I would like it to have a big football team to draw people together. I'd like to see it have its own newspaper, which it doesn't have either. So it's a very deprived area. It's got very little. And there's so much that should be done. And I look at John McDonnell, the MP for 20 years, and I think it's still a poor area, so what has he achieved? And it's very frustrating to see that.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And best of luck tonight.
Thank you very much. And are you saying Norwegian tuck? Is
that right? Yeah, correct.
Tuck. That's the extent of my Norwegian.
That's amazing.
Not very.
Well, that was Bill. He was telling us about Brexit, that if Labour gets elected, it might not actually happen. We will be back with more on that later.